Picture Lao Tzu, an ancient Chinese sage, slowly guiding his water buffalo along a dusty road toward the western frontier. Around 500 BCE, this quiet, weathered man carried no possessions, only a lifetime of insight into the hidden rhythms of the universe, wisdom that would transform human thought for millennia. Known today as the legendary founder of Taoism, Lao Tzu offered a vision of power, success, and harmony that stood in stark contrast to the chaos of his age. He was born into China's turbulent spring and autumn period, a time of relentless wars, collapsing kingdoms, and social unrest. While countless officials and thinkers were consumed by ambition and conflict, Lao Tzu turned inward. From his calm observation of disorder arose something timeless, a philosophy that sought not to control the world, but to flow with it. Legend tells us that Lao Tzu, whose name literally means old master or ancient child, served for decades as keeper of the royal archives in the Zhou dynasty capital, a position that afforded him unique insight into the rise and fall of dynasties, the endless cycle of human ambition and disappointment, and the profound suffering that inevitably follows when societies lose touch with natural harmony. Unlike his contemporaries, who sought to impose order through increasingly complex legal codes, military force, and rigid hierarchical systems, Lao Tzu discovered something revolutionary in the quiet spaces between action and stillness, in the gentle power that flows like water around obstacles rather than crashing violently against them, in the profound strength that emerges from yielding rather than forcing. For years, he observed how the mighty fell and the humble endured, how aggressive conquest ultimately weakened those who pursued it, how the pursuit of artificial goals created endless dissatisfaction even among those who achieved them. He watched as brilliant strategists exhausted themselves through constant scheming, as powerful rulers became prisoners of their own ambition, as complex systems collapsed under the weight of their own complications. Through this careful observation, Lao Tzu began to discern patterns that revealed a completely different approach to effectiveness, leadership, and personal fulfillment. If you're finding wisdom in these philosophical journeys, I'd truly appreciate a quick like or subscribe. It genuinely helps more than you might imagine. I'm always curious to know where you're joining us from around the globe, so drop a comment with your city and what time it is there right now. There's something magical about our worldwide community connecting through these timeless insights that transcend cultural boundaries and historical periods. Now, settle into your most comfortable position. Perhaps dim those lights and let that gentle evening breeze remind you of the soft, natural wisdom we're about to explore together. We're diving deep into why understanding Lao Tzu's revolutionary insights might be exactly what our restless, striving, perpetually dissatisfied world needs most urgently. When the emperor's court finally became too corrupt and artificial for his conscience to bear any longer, when the gap between natural wisdom and political maneuvering became an unbridgeable chasm, Lao Tzu made a decision that would echo through the corridors of history for thousands of years. He quietly mounted his faithful water buffalo and began the long journey westward, intending to disappear completely into the wilderness beyond civilization's corrupting reach, carrying his wisdom into silence rather than allowing it to be distorted by those who would use it for personal advantage or political manipulation. But at Hanggu Pass, the remote border crossing that marked the boundary between the civilized world and the unknown territories beyond, the border guard, a man of unusual perception named Yin Shi, recognized the departing sage and understood that something precious was about to be lost forever to humanity. "You cannot pass through this gate," the guard declared with respectful firmness, "until you write down your teachings for future generations. The world has too great a need for this wisdom to let it disappear into the western mountains." What emerged from this fateful encounter was the Tao Te Ching, perhaps the most translated and widely read philosophical text in human history after the Bible. A slim volume of just 81 brief chapters that would prove to contain more practical wisdom about the nature of reality, human psychology, effective leadership, and the art of living than most libraries full of conventional philosophical treatises. In elegant, poetic language that seems almost effortlessly simple, yet reveals new depths of meaning with each reading, Lao-Tzu captured insights about existence, consciousness, and the fundamental patterns of change that continue to guide seekers, leaders, artists, and ordinary people seeking authentic fulfillment across all cultures and historical periods. His words speak to something universal and timeless in human experience: the deep longing for peace amidst chaos, the search for authentic power that doesn't corrupt those who possess it, the desire for effectiveness that doesn't require exhausting struggle, the quest for wisdom that illuminates rather than complicates, and the profound need for meaning that transcends the temporary satisfactions of material success or social recognition. The Tao Te Ching addresses these fundamental human concerns not through complex theoretical arguments or elaborate logical proofs, but through direct pointing toward truths that can be verified through careful observation of nature and honest examination of our own experience. What makes Lao-Tzu unique among the world's great philosophers and spiritual teachers isn't his systematic arguments or scholarly erudition, but his profound understanding of paradox as the key to unlocking deeper truth about how reality actually works. While Western philosophical traditions often seek to resolve contradictions through logical analysis and clear definitions, Lao-Tzu embraced apparent contradictions as doorways to wisdom that transcends ordinary thinking. The soft overcomes the hard. Emptiness enables fullness. Weakness conquers strength. Yielding leads to victory. And the sage leads most effectively by following rather than commanding. These aren't mere poetic expressions or mystical riddles, but practical insights into the fundamental patterns that govern everything, from personal relationships to political dynamics to creative processes. Through masterful observations drawn from water, valleys, newborn children, and the uncarved block of wood, Lao-Tzu revealed principles of natural harmony that remain astonishingly relevant to contemporary challenges. In our age of constant struggle and relentless competition, he offers Wu Wei, the art of effortless action that accomplishes more through understanding natural patterns than force can achieve through direct opposition. In our time of information, overload, and increasingly complex technological systems, he presents Pu, the profound simplicity of the uncarved block that contains infinite potential precisely because it hasn't been shaped by artificial limitations. In our era of environmental crisis and social division, he demonstrates Ti, authentic power that nurtures and strengthens rather than dominating and depleting. His revolutionary insights continue to reshape our understanding of effective leadership, sustainable creativity, authentic relationships, and personal fulfillment in ways that conventional wisdom simply cannot match. From corporate boardrooms to meditation halls, from therapy offices to artistic studios, from family homes to international diplomatic negotiations, Lao Tzu's wisdom offers practical alternatives to the exhausting paradigms of force, manipulation, competition, and endless striving that characterize so much of modern life while producing so little genuine satisfaction or lasting peace. Part 1. The Tao that cannot be named. Understanding the source of all existence. To truly understand Lao Tzu's revolutionary vision, we must begin exactly where he begins, with the mysterious, ineffable source of all existence itself, the Tao that gives birth to everything, yet cannot be captured in words, concepts, or even the most sophisticated philosophical systems. The famous opening lines of the Tao Te Ching immediately confront us with a fundamental paradox that challenges our ordinary relationship with language, knowledge, and reality itself. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Here, in the very first breath of his teaching, Lao Tzu points towards something that transcends the reach of ordinary language, conceptual thought, and all the mental categories we typically use to organize and understand our experience. What exactly is this Tao that he speaks of with such profound reverence, yet insists cannot be adequately described or defined? The Chinese character itself originally suggested a path or roadway, the way that leads from one place to another. But Lao Tzu uses this common word to indicate something infinitely more fundamental than any particular route or methodology. The Tao represents the ultimate source from which all things emerge, the underlying pattern that governs all transformation and change, the hidden harmony that maintains cosmic balance even in the midst of apparent chaos and confusion. Unlike Western philosophical concepts of an anthropomorphic deity who creates the universe through conscious will, deliberate design, and explicit intention, the Tao generates all existence effortlessly and spontaneously, without planning, striving, or even the kind of purposeful action that characterizes human behavior. As Lao Tzu describes this process in language that seems almost absurdly simple, yet contains profound implications. The Tao gives birth to one. One gives birth to two. Two gives birth to three. Three gives birth to the 10,000 things. This isn't mechanical causation operating through predictable laws of physics, but organic unfolding that resembles the way seeds naturally sprout when conditions are appropriate. Rivers naturally flow toward the sea, following the path of least resistance, or seasons naturally change according to cosmic rhythms that require no external management or control. The Tao operates through what Lao Tzu calls Wu Wei, literally meaning non-action or effortless action, a principle that revolutionizes our understanding of power, effectiveness, and the relationship between effort and results. This doesn't mean passivity, laziness, or complete inaction, but rather action that flows so naturally from existing conditions and circumstances that it seems to happen by itself. Like water finding its way downhill, or a skilled musician whose fingers move across the keys without conscious control of each individual movement. Wu Wei represents the highest form of skillful action, effort that's so perfectly aligned with natural patterns and optimal timing that it appears effortless to observers and feels effortless to those who have mastered this approach. Consider how water demonstrates this principle in countless ways throughout the natural world. Water never fights against obstacles in its path, but always finds ways around them, gradually reshaping even the hardest stone through patient persistence rather than violent force. It naturally seeks the lowest places that others consider worthless or beneath their dignity, yet precisely Because of this humility, water nourishes all life and makes possible the rich ecosystems that support the entire web of existence. Water is transparent, yielding, and apparently weak when compared to solid rock or mighty trees. Yet it possesses the power to carve grand canyons, move enormous boulders, and eventually transform entire landscapes through its gentle but persistent influence. For Lao-Tzu, human suffering and social chaos arise primarily from losing touch with this natural way of operating, from attempting to force outcomes through excessive effort, imposing rigid systems that ignore organic patterns of development, pursuing artificial goals that conflict with our deeper nature and the natural rhythms of growth and change. When individuals, organizations, or entire societies operate against the Tao rather than in harmony with it, they create unnecessary friction, exhaust themselves through inefficient struggle, and often achieve results that prove ultimately unsatisfying even when they appear successful according to conventional measures. The wise person learns to recognize the Tao's subtle movement in every situation and aligns their actions with these natural currents rather than fighting against them. This alignment doesn't require special esoteric knowledge, complex techniques, or years of difficult spiritual practice. In fact, Lao-Tzu suggests that our original nature is already in perfect harmony with the Tao, and that most of what we call education, socialization, and self-improvement actually takes us further away from this natural wisdom rather than closer to it. Children naturally exhibit this organic wisdom before cultural conditioning teaches them to strive competitively, manipulate others for personal advantage, and pursue goals that society values rather than what genuinely fulfills their essential nature. Can you be like a newborn child? Lao-Tzu asks, pointing toward an innocence that perceives reality directly without the distorting filters of preconceptions, expectations, and learned categories that cloud adult perception. This childlike state isn't ignorance or naivety, but the clear seeing that becomes possible when the mind hasn't yet learned to separate itself from the natural flow of existence. The Tao manifests throughout creation as the dynamic interplay of yin and yang, the complementary forces that create all diversity and change within the underlying unity of existence. Yin represents the receptive, yielding, interior, dark, cool, and traditionally feminine aspects of reality. Yang represents the active, assertive, exterior, bright, warm, and traditionally masculine dimensions of existence. Neither principle is superior to the other. Both are essential aspects of the creative dance that produces and sustains all phenomena in the universe. Understanding yin and yang transforms our relationship with apparent opposites and contradictions in our personal lives and social experience. Light and darkness, joy and sorrow, strength and weakness, gain and loss, success and failure. These aren't enemies to be conquered or problems to be solved, but complementary aspects of a larger wholeness that includes and transcends both sides of every polarity. The sage learns to move gracefully between these polarities, yielding when circumstances call for receptivity, asserting when situations require decisive action, recognizing that each pole naturally contains the seed of its opposite, and that trying to maintain any extreme position indefinitely leads to exhaustion and eventual reversal. This dynamic perspective revolutionizes our understanding of difficulty, challenge, and apparent obstacles in our path. Instead of seeing problems as enemies to be eliminated or overcome through force, we can recognize them as opportunities for practicing Wu Wei, for discovering how to flow skillfully around resistance, for finding creative solutions that transform opposition into cooperation. How can we accomplish our authentic goals through yielding rather than forcing? What would it look like to achieve success through embracing apparent weakness rather than asserting conventional strength? How might seeming disadvantages become sources of unique capability and influence? Lao Tzu frequently uses water as the master metaphor for understanding how the Tao operates and how wise people align themselves with its natural patterns. Nothing in the world is softer than water, yet nothing is better at overcoming the hard and strong. This is because nothing can substitute for it. Water doesn't compete with other elements for dominance or recognition, but naturally fulfills its essential function of nourishing life, facilitating growth, and maintaining the dynamic balance that supports all ecosystems. Water teaches us about the power of persistence without aggression, influence without manipulation, and effectiveness without ego-driven striving. It shows us how to remain clear and transparent while reflecting accurately whatever appears before us. It demonstrates how to be useful to others without losing our essential nature or becoming depleted through excessive giving. Most importantly, water reveals how apparent weakness, softness, yielding, seeking low places, can become sources of tremendous strength and lasting influence. The Tao also manifests as Ti, often translated as virtue, but meaning something closer to authentic power or natural excellence that emerges from perfect alignment with one's essential nature and optimal circumstances. Unlike conventional power that depends on force, accumulation of resources, or dominance over others, Ti represents power that flows naturally from understanding, wisdom, and harmony with the deeper patterns that govern effective action. Ti cannot be pursued directly, manufactured through techniques, or achieved through willpower and determined effort. It arises spontaneously when we stop trying to be something we're not and allow our authentic nature to express itself freely through appropriate response to whatever life presents. Like a tree naturally growing toward sunlight or a river naturally flowing toward the ocean, Ti represents the effortless expression of beings who are living in accordance with their deepest nature and highest potential without forcing or pretending. The sage possesses the not through personal achievement or spiritual attainment, but through becoming transparent to the Tao's natural operation. They command respect and influence not because they demand it or manipulate others to provide it, but because their presence naturally evokes recognition of wisdom, authenticity, and genuine care for the well-being of all. People follow such leaders willingly, not from fear or obligation, but because they sense the beneficial results that naturally follow from alignment with deeper wisdom and natural harmony. Part 2. The Art of Effortless Action. Mastering Wu Wei in daily life. How do we act decisively without forcing outcomes? How do we achieve significant results without exhausting ourselves through constant struggle? How do we lead effectively without controlling or manipulating others? How do we remain productive and engaged while maintaining inner peace and natural spontaneity? These questions point directly toward Wu Wei, perhaps Lao Tzu's most revolutionary and frequently misunderstood teaching, representing not passive inaction or lazy indifference, but the highest form of skillful response that emerges when human intelligence operates in perfect harmony with natural patterns and optimal timing. Consider the master craftsperson whose hands seem to move by themselves, shaping wood or clay or metal with such fluid precision that the boundary between tool, material, and artisan disappears entirely. Watch the accomplished athlete who flows through complex movements with effortless grace, making extraordinarily difficult feats appear simple and natural. Observe the experienced parent who somehow knows exactly how to respond to a child's needs without consulting parenting manuals or following rigid rules. These examples point toward Wu Wei in action, the remarkable results that become possible when skill, understanding, and intuitive response integrate so completely that conscious effort becomes unnecessary and often counterproductive. Wu Wei emerges from what Lao-Tzu calls ziran, meaning spontaneous naturalness, or what is so of itself. Action that flows from perfect understanding of circumstances combined with complete attunement to optimal timing, rather than from predetermined plans, rigid formulas, or artificial systems imposed on organic situations. This isn't randomness, impulsiveness, or chaotic behavior, but response that arises from such deep comprehension of underlying patterns that appropriate action becomes as natural and effortless as breathing or the beating of one's heart. The experienced farmer provides a perfect example of ziran in practical application. They know when to plant and when to harvest, not through consulting calendars or following standardized schedules, but through intimate familiarity with seasonal rhythms, soil conditions, weather patterns, and the subtle signs that indicate optimal timing for various agricultural activities. Their actions appear effortless because they're working with natural cycles rather than against them, supporting organic processes rather than trying to control them through force or artificial manipulation. This kind of natural timing and organic response requires what Lao-Tzu describes as returning to the root, or recovering our original simplicity before it becomes clouded by excessive thinking, social conditioning, and the pursuit of artificial goals that have little connection to our authentic nature or genuine well-being. Our minds and bodies naturally possess the wisdom to respond appropriately to life's changing circumstances, but this innate intelligence gets obscured by layers of learned behavior, cultural expectations, and mental habits that create separation between our authentic responses and the personas we think we should project. The practice of Wu Wei begins with careful observation and radical acceptance of what is actually happening in any given situation rather than what we think should be happening, what we wish were happening, or what we fear might happen. Most human effort and energy gets wasted in fighting against reality, trying to force situations to conform to our preferences and expectations rather than working skillfully with the actual conditions that are present. Wu Wei starts with the profound recognition that reality is exactly as it is in this moment, regardless of our opinions about it, and then asks how we can respond most effectively and appropriately from that foundation of clear seeing and honest acknowledgement. This approach doesn't mean passive resignation to unacceptable circumstances or abandoning our legitimate goals and healthy desires. Rather, it means recognizing that our objectives are most likely to be achieved through understanding and working harmoniously with natural patterns, rather than opposing them through force, manipulation, or excessive effort. If we want to influence someone's thinking, Wu Wei suggests creating conditions where they naturally arrive at new insights through their own process of discovery, rather than trying to impose our perspective upon them through argument, pressure, or emotional manipulation. If we want to solve complex problems Wu Wei involves understanding root causes and addressing those fundamental issues rather than just treating surface symptoms that will inevitably reappear if underlying patterns remain unchanged. If we want to develop new skills or capabilities, Wu Wei means working with our natural learning rhythms and building upon existing strengths rather than forcing ourselves through rigid training regimens that ignore individual differences and organic developmental processes. Lao-Tzu frequently uses the metaphor of the empty valley to illustrate these principles of effective action through apparent inaction. Valleys are extraordinarily useful precisely because they're empty, low, and receptive rather than filled, high, and imposing. They naturally gather water from surrounding mountains, concentrate the richest soil through natural erosion and deposition, support the most diverse and abundant vegetation, and provide shelter, transportation routes, and favorable conditions for human settlements. The valley's apparent weakness, its lowness and emptiness, becomes the source of its tremendous usefulness and lasting influence. Similarly, the sage cultivates what might appear to be weakness, but actually represents profound strength, not having all the answers immediately available, which creates space for genuine learning and discovery, not forcing quick solutions to complex problems, which allows time for deeper understanding and more elegant approaches to emerge, not insisting on personal recognition and credit, which enables others to contribute their best efforts without feeling competitive or threatened, not controlling every aspect of situations, which allows natural wisdom and organic processes to operate freely. This empty, receptive approach also suggests the crucial importance of yin qualities in effective action and wise leadership. While yang energy advances assertively and drives forward with focused intensity, yin energy creates attractive spaces that naturally draw people, resources, and opportunities toward itself. The wise person cultivates both capacities fully, knowing when circumstances call for decisive advancement and when they call for patient receptivity, when situations require clear speaking and when they require skillful listening, when problems need direct action and when they need the kind of spacious allowing that permits natural solutions to emerge organically. This balanced integration of yin and yang transforms our entire relationship with effort, achievement, and success. Instead of measuring our effectiveness by how hard we're working, how much we're struggling, or how much stress and tension we're experiencing, Wu Wei suggests that the most powerful action often feels surprisingly easy and natural when we're truly aligned with optimal conditions and appropriate timing. When we find ourselves fighting against strong resistance, experiencing chronic stress, or feeling that every step forward requires enormous struggle, these may be indicators that we're working against natural patterns rather than cooperating intelligently with them. Timing becomes absolutely crucial in the practical application of Wu Wei principles. Lao-Tzu observes with characteristic insight that there is a time for being ahead, a time for being behind, a time for being in motion, a time for being at rest, a time for vigorous effort, a time for gentle patience. The sage develops increasingly refined sensitivity to these natural rhythms and cycles, learning to act decisively when action is genuinely called for, and to wait patiently when premature effort would waste energy or create unnecessary complications. This sensitivity to natural timing requires cultivating what Lao-Tzu calls shu, often translated as emptiness, stillness, or spaciousness. This isn't the emptiness of lack, absence, or deprivation, but the dynamic emptiness of unlimited potential, like the hollow space inside a bowl that makes it useful for holding water, or the silence between musical notes that makes melody and rhythm possible, or the pauses between words that make meaningful communication possible. By developing inner stillness and spaciousness, we become much more sensitive to the subtle currents, emerging patterns, and energetic shifts that indicate when circumstances are becoming favorable for various types of action. We learn to recognize when situations are ripening naturally toward change and when they're still in phases that require patience, preparation, and allowing natural processes to unfold at their own optimal pace. The practice of Wu Wei also involves what Lao-Tzu describes as acting without attachment to specific results, maintaining clear intention and appropriate effort while remaining open and flexible about exactly how our goals might be achieved and what form successful outcomes might actually take. This doesn't mean not caring about results or being indifferent to whether our actions prove effective, but rather avoiding the kind of rigid fixation on predetermined outcomes that prevents us from recognizing unexpected opportunities and alternative approaches that might prove even more successful than our original plans. When we're strongly attached to having things work out in very specific ways, we tend to force situations and miss creative possibilities that could lead to results far better than anything we initially imagined. When we maintain clear direction while staying open to various possibilities, we can respond more skillfully to changing circumstances and often discover solutions that are more elegant, sustainable, and satisfying than what we could have planned through purely analytical thinking. Part 3: The Uncarved Block and the Recovery of Original Simplicity. In a world increasingly obsessed with complexity, sophisticated technologies, endless self-improvement projects, and the accumulation of specialized knowledge, Lao-Tzu points toward a radically different source of wisdom and effectiveness. Pu, the uncarved block of wood that contains infinite potential, precisely because it hasn't yet been shaped by artificial limitations, cultural conditioning, or the pursuit of socially approved goals that may have little connection to authentic fulfillment or natural harmony. This isn't mere primitivism, anti-intellectualism, or romantic nostalgia for some imagined golden age of simplicity, but rather profound recognition that our original nature, human consciousness, before it becomes shaped and constrained by layers of social conditioning, learned fears, and artificial desires, contains remarkable wisdom and capability that often gets obscured rather than enhanced by much of what modern culture considers education, progress, and personal development. Imagine a beautiful piece of unworked wood, smooth and natural, containing unlimited potential to become a bowl, a sculpture, a musical instrument, a tool, or countless other useful and beautiful objects. Its value lies not in any particular form it has already taken, but in the infinite possibilities it represents before any specific shaping begins. Once carved into a particular object, while it may become very useful for specific purposes, its possibilities become necessarily limited to that particular function and form. Similarly, human consciousness in its original, unconditioned state possesses infinite flexibility and responsiveness, capable of meeting any situation with fresh awareness, creative solutions, and appropriate responses that emerge naturally from direct perception rather than from predetermined patterns, learned reactions, or conceptual frameworks that may not fit actual circumstances. As we acquire layers of fixed ideas, rigid habits, conditional responses, and cultural programming, we gradually lose this natural adaptability and spontaneous wisdom. Lao Tzu suggests that most of our psychological and social problems stem from too much artificial shaping and conditioning rather than too little education and sophistication. We're taught from early childhood to want things we don't naturally need, to fear situations that aren't genuinely threatening, to value achievements that don't bring real satisfaction, to compete for resources and recognition that don't actually enhance our well-being or contribute to meaningful existence. This cultural programming creates persistent internal conflict between our authentic nature and the personas we've learned to project, between what genuinely nourishes us and what we think we should pursue, between our natural rhythms and the artificial schedules imposed by social institutions that often ignore human needs for rest, reflection, creative expression, and organic development. Returning to PU doesn't mean rejecting all learning, abandoning useful technologies, or attempting to live like primitive people without the benefits of accumulated human knowledge and cultural achievements. Instead, it means recovering the essential simplicity that can integrate new information without being burdened or confused by it, that can use sophisticated tools without becoming enslaved to them, that can participate meaningfully in complex social systems without losing touch with the natural wisdom that enables authentic response to life's constantly changing circumstances. This original simplicity manifests as what Lao Tzu calls ji, often translated as knowledge, but referring to direct, intuitive understanding rather than accumulated information, conceptual analysis, or secondhand opinions about reality. This isn't anti-rational or opposed to careful thinking, but represents a more fundamental way of knowing that operates before the analytical mind divides immediate experience into separate categories of subject and object, self and other, good and bad, useful and useless. It's the kind of knowing that enables parents to sense their children's real needs beyond what the children themselves might be able to articulate, that allows skilled craftspeople to work with natural materials in ways that bring out their inherent beauty and functionality, that permits wise teachers to understand what their students actually need to learn, rather than just what curriculum guidelines specify should be taught. Young children naturally exhibit this kind of direct, immediate knowing. Before extensive education teaches them to distrust their spontaneous perceptions and rely instead on external authorities, abstract concepts, and theoretical frameworks that may have little connection to their actual experience. They respond authentically to situations without excessive self-consciousness, express emotions honestly without strategic calculation, and remain naturally curious about everything without needing to categorize and control their experience according to predetermined schemes. This isn't ignorance, naivety, or lack of development, but rather innocence in the most profound sense. The wisdom of beings who haven't yet learned to separate themselves from the natural flow of life, who haven't yet acquired the mental habits that create artificial divisions between themselves and their environment, who haven't yet developed the chronic self-consciousness that prevents spontaneous response and authentic expression. The practical path of returning to Pu involves what Lao Tzu describes as daily learning and daily unlearning, continuing to acquire whatever skills, information, and capabilities are genuinely necessary for effective living, while simultaneously releasing the artificial complications, unnecessary desires, social conditioning, and mental habits that obscure our natural wisdom and create internal conflict. This process requires developing the ability to distinguish between what genuinely serves our authentic well-being and what we've been conditioned to think we need for happiness, success, or social acceptance. Much of what contemporary culture presents as essential for a good life, constant entertainment, material accumulation, social status, competitive achievement, technological convenience, often creates more complications and dissatisfaction than genuine enhancement of our existence. Learning to unlearn means questioning fundamental assumptions about what constitutes success, happiness, security, and meaningful existence. It means examining our automatic habits and reactions to discover which ones actually serve us and which ones we've simply inherited from family patterns, cultural expectations, or unconscious imitation of others. It means developing the courage to live according to our authentic values and natural rhythms, rather than constantly adapting ourselves to external pressures and social approval. Simplicity in this context doesn't mean simplistic thinking, naive solutions to complex problems, or rejection of necessary complexity when situations genuinely require sophisticated understanding and skillful response. Rather, it means discovering the essential patterns and fundamental principles that underlie surface complexity, like recognizing the simple mathematical laws that govern apparently chaotic natural phenomena, or understanding the basic human needs and motivations that drive seemingly incomprehensible social behavior. The sage can navigate tremendous complexity precisely because they understand underlying simplicities that others miss when they get lost in details, complications, and surface-level analysis. They can work effectively with sophisticated systems while maintaining clarity about fundamental purposes and essential priorities that prevent them from becoming overwhelmed by unnecessary complications or distracted by trivial concerns. This wisdom appears clearly in Lao-Tzu's revolutionary approach to desires, contentment, and the pursuit of happiness. Instead of trying to satisfy every want that arises through acquisition, achievement, or experience, he suggests cultivating natural satisfaction with what is genuinely sufficient for authentic well-being. Those who know they have enough are truly wealthy, he observes, pointing toward a kind of contentment that doesn't depend on external circumstances or constant acquisition of new pleasures, possessions, or experiences. This isn't asceticism, self-deprivation, or the suppression of legitimate needs and healthy desires, but rather recognition that much of what contemporary culture encourages us to pursue creates more complications and dissatisfaction than genuine fulfillment. The uncarved block is naturally content with its essential nature and doesn't need to be constantly improved, decorated, or transformed into something else in order to have value and usefulness. Similarly, human beings who remain connected to their original simplicity find deep satisfaction in basic experiences that don't require constant novelty, expensive enhancement, or social validation. Meaningful work that uses their natural capabilities, authentic relationships based on mutual care and understanding, creative expression that emerges from genuine inspiration rather than external pressure, quiet moments of appreciation for the natural beauty that surrounds us constantly. The uncarved block also represents what Lao Tzu calls the wisdom of not knowing, or great foolishness, a state of mind that appears ignorant or naive to people who pride themselves on cleverness, sophisticated analysis, and complex theoretical understanding, but actually represents profound wisdom that comes from recognizing the limitations of conceptual knowledge and remaining open to direct learning from immediate experience. This not knowing isn't actual ignorance or anti-intellectual defensiveness, but rather the humility and openness that characterize genuine wisdom. The sage appears foolish to those who confuse information accumulation with understanding, who mistake conceptual complexity for insight, who assume that having opinions about everything indicates superior intelligence. True wisdom often requires admitting that we don't really understand situations as completely as we pretend, that our knowledge is always partial and provisional, that reality is far more mysterious and dynamic than our concepts and theories can capture. This honest acknowledgement of limitations creates space for genuine learning, creative discovery, and fresh solutions that become impossible when we're convinced we already know everything important about any given situation. This not knowing enables what contemporary psychology calls beginner's mind, the capacity to approach even familiar situations with fresh awareness, rather than through the filter of past experience, fixed expectations, and predetermined categories. Even circumstances we've encountered many times before can reveal new possibilities when met with this kind of openness and curiosity. The expert has learned to see situations in particular ways that may be very useful within specific contexts, but can also become limitations when circumstances change or when creative solutions require thinking outside established patterns. The sage has learned to see with eyes unclouded by preconceptions, available to discover what's actually happening rather than what they expect to find, based on previous experience or theoretical frameworks. Part 4. The Leader Who Serves. Revolutionary Principles of Authentic Authority. How do you guide others without controlling them? How do you create positive change without imposing your will through force or manipulation? How do you maintain authority while remaining humble and responsive to the needs of those you serve? How do you inspire genuine cooperation rather than mere compliance? Lao Tzu's approach to leadership represents perhaps his most practically revolutionary teaching, presenting a model of authentic authority based on service, moral example, and natural influence rather than domination, control, and the exercise of power over others. The sage leader, according to Lao Tzu's profound analysis, is one whose presence people barely notice consciously, yet whose influence creates conditions where everyone naturally contributes their best efforts and discovers their own capability for wisdom and effectiveness. The best leaders are those whose existence the people are barely aware of. The next best is a leader who is loved and praised by those they serve. Next comes the one who is feared and obeyed through intimidation. The worst one is the leader who is despised and resisted. This hierarchy reflects the fundamental principle that the most effective leadership works through natural influence and voluntary cooperation rather than obvious control, external pressure, or forced compliance. Think carefully about how water nourishes and supports all life throughout the natural world without competing with anything, without demanding recognition or gratitude, always seeking the lowest places that others consider beneath their dignity or unworthy of attention. Yet precisely because of this humility and selfless service, water makes possible the rich ecosystems that support the entire web of existence. Similarly, the wise leader naturally takes positions that others might consider beneath them, serving rather than being served, taking responsibility for failures while giving credit for successes to others, addressing practical needs rather than seeking personal glory, status, or recognition. This servant leadership approach isn't weakness disguised as strength, false humility designed to manipulate others, or strategic self-deprecation aimed at gaining advantage. Rather, it represents recognition that authentic power emerges from enabling others to express their natural capabilities, discover their own wisdom, and contribute meaningfully to shared goals rather than from controlling their behavior through external rewards, punishments, or psychological manipulation. The sage leader creates optimal conditions where people naturally want to offer their best efforts, where individual talents can flourish and contribute to collective well-being, where problems get solved through collaborative wisdom rather than top-down directives, where innovation and creativity emerge organically rather than being forced through artificial incentives or pressure systems. Such leadership requires what Lao-Tzu calls knowing the people's hearts, genuine understanding of human nature, motivation, and the conditions that enable individuals and communities to flourish rather than merely survive or comply with external demands. This isn't manipulation based on psychological techniques or strategic analysis of human weakness, but authentic insight that emerges from the leader's own clarity about their own mind, motivations, and the fundamental needs that drive all human behavior. Because the sage has understood the patterns of desire, fear, ambition, and genuine aspiration within their own consciousness, they can recognize what's actually happening beneath the surface of other people's words and actions. They can distinguish between authentic needs and artificial wants, between genuine concerns and manufactured anxieties, between natural resistance that signals important information and reflexive opposition that comes from misunderstanding or past conditioning. This deep understanding enables the sage leader to respond appropriately, to create harmony rather than conflict, cooperation rather than resistance, willing participation rather than forced compliance. They know when to provide clear direction and when to allow others to find their own way, when to offer support and when to maintain space for independent growth, when to intervene decisively and when to trust natural processes to resolve difficulties organically. The sage leader also embodies what Lao-Tzu describes as acting for the people's benefit without expecting gratitude or recognition, making decisions based consistently on what truly serves the common good, rather than what will gain popularity, personal advantage, or temporary approval from those being served. This sometimes requires making unpopular choices, delivering unwelcome news, or maintaining standards that others might prefer to ignore. But the wise leader has developed the inner strength and clarity to do what's genuinely necessary rather than what's immediately expedient or emotionally comfortable. This approach fundamentally transforms our understanding of authority and obedience, power, and responsibility. Instead of commanding through external force, threats, or elaborate reward systems, the sage leader guides primarily through moral example and the kind of natural influence that emerges from demonstrated wisdom, authentic care for others' well-being, and consistent alignment between stated values and actual behavior. People follow such leaders willingly and enthusiastically because they recognize genuine wisdom in action, because they benefit directly from the leader's presence and guidance, because they feel respected and valued rather than manipulated or exploited. The authority is earned continuously through demonstrated virtue and effective results rather than imposed through position, title, or institutional power alone. Lao-Tzu emphasizes repeatedly the crucial importance of Wu Wei in effective leadership. the ability to govern with minimal intervention, to guide without controlling, to influence without manipulating. The best way to govern is through non-governance, he suggests, not meaning anarchy or the absence of necessary structure and guidance, but leadership that works so harmoniously with natural patterns and human nature that it feels effortless and organic rather than forced or artificial. Like a supremely skilled conductor who enables musicians to perform at their highest level through subtle guidance, clear communication, and inspirational presence rather than micromanagement and constant correction. The sage leader creates conditions where others naturally discover and express their own capabilities, wisdom, and creative potential. This style of leadership requires tremendous personal discipline and continuous inner development. The leader must first master their own desires, emotions, fears, and reactive patterns before they can effectively guide others through similar challenges. As Lao-Tzu puts it with characteristic insight, those who flow as life flows know they need no other force. The leader, who has found genuine inner harmony, naturally creates conditions that enable others to discover their own balance and authentic response to changing circumstances. The sage leader understands profoundly the principle of leading from behind, supporting others' success and development rather than competing for attention, recognition, or credit. Like a wise shepherd who follows the flock while providing gentle guidance that prevents the animals from wandering into dangerous territory or missing opportunities for good grazing. The effective leader enables others to discover their own direction while offering subtle influence that prevents serious mistakes and enhances natural capabilities. This approach requires the leader to find deep satisfaction in others' growth and achievement, rather than needing constant validation or visible recognition of their own contribution. The best leaders often work so skillfully behind the scenes that their essential role becomes invisible to casual observation. Yet their influence shapes everything that happens in positive and sustainable ways. Part 5. Embracing the Valley Spirit, the hidden power of receptivity. What enables endless creativity and continuous renewal? What allows certain people to remain fresh, responsive, and generative throughout their entire lives, while others become rigid, depleted, and increasingly disconnected from sources of inspiration and vitality? Lao-Tzu discovered the answer in what he calls the Valley Spirit, or mysterious feminine, the profound receptive principle that nourishes all existence without competing for recognition, that generates infinite possibilities without forcing particular outcomes, that creates space for new life to emerge naturally, rather than imposing predetermined forms on organic processes. The Valley Spirit represents the essential power of yin energy, the receptive, nurturing, interior, patient, and traditionally feminine dimension of existence that complements but never competes with Yang's active, assertive, exterior, immediate, and traditionally masculine expression. In cultures and individuals that overvalue masculine qualities while systematically undervaluing feminine wisdom, Lao-Tzu points toward the hidden power of receptivity, patience, gentle persistence, and the kind of strength that emerges from understanding and working with natural patterns rather than opposing them through force. Consider carefully how valleys actually function within the larger ecosystem of mountains, plains, and waterways. Valleys are low, empty, and apparently passive when compared to the dramatic peaks that surround them. Yet they naturally gather water from surrounding heights, concentrate the richest soil through natural processes of erosion and deposition, shelter the most diverse and abundant plant and animal life, and serve as natural pathways for rivers, wildlife migration, and human transportation and settlement. The valley's apparent weakness, its lowness and emptiness, becomes the source of tremendous usefulness, lasting influence, and essential service to the whole landscape. The valley doesn't try to compete with mountain peaks for impressiveness, visibility, or dramatic beauty, yet it provides what the peaks cannot: fertile ground for growth, shelter from harsh weather, access to water, and the kind of protected environment where delicate life forms can establish themselves and flourish. Lao Tzu suggests that cultivating valley-like qualities enables human beings to become sources of renewal, creativity, and support for others, rather than just consumers of energy, resources, and attention. The highest good is like water, which nourishes all things without competing with them, he observes, pointing toward the profound satisfaction and effectiveness that become possible when we adopt receptive, supportive approaches rather than constantly striving for dominance, recognition, or personal advantage. This receptive approach initially appears paradoxical to minds trained in competitive thinking and achievement-oriented cultures. How can yielding lead to genuine strength? How can emptiness create lasting fullness? How can occupying lower positions result in greater influence? How can not seeking lead to finding what we most deeply need? Yet Lao Tzu demonstrates this principle operating throughout nature and human experience in ways that become obvious once we learn to recognize them. The emptiness of a bowl makes it useful for holding water, food, or precious objects. The silence between musical notes makes melody, harmony, and rhythm possible. The open space within buildings makes them habitable and functional. The pauses between words make meaningful communication possible. The rest between activities allows for integration, renewal, and preparation for future action. The mysterious feminine isn't limited to biological women, but represents a fundamental way of being that's available to all people, regardless of gender, age, cultural background, or personal history. It's the capacity to listen deeply, without immediately judging or trying to fix what we hear, to respond patiently to changing circumstances without forcing premature solutions, to nurture growth in others without controlling the direction that growth takes, to enable people to discover their own potential rather than imposing our vision of what they should become. These receptive qualities can be developed and expressed by anyone willing to cultivate them, and their absence in individuals, relationships, organizations, or entire cultures creates fundamental imbalance that eventually leads to exhaustion, conflict, and systemic breakdown. Communities that operate only through yang energy, constant activity, aggressive competition, dominance hierarchies, forced productivity, inevitably burn themselves out and create environments where people cannot thrive sustainably over time. Lao Tzu describes this essential balance as knowing the male yet keeping to the female, meaning maintaining both active and receptive capacities while emphasizing the receptive because it's more easily overlooked, undervalued, or suppressed in cultures that reward only obvious achievement and external success. The sage remains fully capable of decisive action, clear communication, and assertive leadership when circumstances genuinely require these approaches, but prefers to accomplish goals through patient influence, skillful timing, and creating conditions where desired outcomes arise naturally rather than being imposed through force. This balanced approach appears clearly in the sage's relationship with knowledge and ignorance, strength and vulnerability, success and failure, gain and loss. Rather than rejecting one side of these polarities in favor of the other, the wise person embraces the dynamic interplay between opposites and learns to move gracefully between them as circumstances require. They remain strong enough to be genuinely gentle without becoming weak or ineffective. They become wise enough to appear simple without being naive or uninformed. They achieve sufficient inner fullness to embrace emptiness without feeling deprived or inadequate. They develop enough genuine confidence to admit mistakes, acknowledge limitations, and ask for help when appropriate without losing credibility or self-respect. The Valley Spirit also represents what Lao-Tzu calls the gateway of the mysterious feminine, the source from which all possibilities emerge, like fertile darkness from which seeds sprout, creative void from which artistic inspiration arises, or pregnant silence from which meaningful words emerge. Like a woman carrying new life within her body, the sage cultivates inner emptiness that becomes a spacious container for creativity, insight, innovation, and renewal. This isn't the emptiness of lack, absence, or deprivation, but the dynamic emptiness of unlimited potential. Consciousness that isn't filled with predetermined ideas, fixed expectations, or rigid plans, and therefore remains available to recognize opportunities, receive inspiration, and respond creatively to whatever emerges in the constantly changing flow of circumstances. This receptive emptiness requires considerable inner development and emotional maturity. It means becoming comfortable with not knowing exactly what will happen next, not having immediate answers to every question, not controlling every aspect of situations we're involved in. It means developing trust in natural processes, organic timing, and the kind of intelligence that operates beyond our conscious planning and analytical understanding. Most people find this level of openness and receptivity initially uncomfortable because we've been conditioned to believe that we must constantly manage, control, and direct our experience in order to feel safe and effective. The Valley Spirit teaches us that some of our most important work happens when we're not actively doing anything, when we're simply creating space for natural wisdom to operate and organic solutions to emerge. Part 6. The Wisdom of Soft Power, Transforming the World Through Gentle Influence. In a world that consistently equates power with force, dominance with strength, and winning with the successful exercise of will over opposition, Lao-Tzu reveals a completely different understanding of authentic power that proves far more effective for creating lasting positive change. His insights about soft power, though he never used this modern political term, present principles that remain revolutionary in their implications for personal relationships, social transformation, organizational leadership, and effective response to conflict at every level of human interaction. Nothing in the world is softer than water, yet nothing is better at conquering the hard and strong. This is because nothing can serve as a substitute for it. This observation isn't mere poetic metaphor or abstract philosophical speculation, but practical wisdom based on careful observation of how lasting change actually occurs throughout the natural world and human societies. Force inevitably creates resistance and often produces results that prove temporary, superficial, or counterproductive over time. Gentle, persistent influence gradually reshapes even the most stubborn obstacles, creates changes that last for generations, and often accomplishes objectives that direct confrontation cannot achieve, regardless of how much energy and resources are applied. Consider again how water demonstrates these principles throughout the natural landscape. It doesn't attack solid rock with violent, dramatic force, but flows persistently along the path of least resistance, gradually wearing away even the hardest granite and limestone through patient, consistent contact over extended periods of time. This process requires considerable time to produce visible results, but creates transformations, like the Grand Canyon, that endure for millions of years and reshape entire geographical regions. Similarly, soft power in human relationships and social change operates through attraction rather than coercion, influence rather than control, moral example rather than direct command, and the creation of conditions where people naturally choose to move in positive directions rather than being forced to comply with external demands against their own judgment and preferences. Soft power manifests as the natural authority of parents, whose calm, steady presence immediately settles agitated children without harsh words or punishment. Teachers whose genuine enthusiasm for learning naturally inspires students to discover their own curiosity and capability. Leaders whose integrity and wisdom naturally command respect and voluntary cooperation from those they serve. And healers whose compassionate presence enables others to access their own capacity for recovery and growth. This approach requires what Lao-Tzu calls conquering without fighting, achieving victory through strategies that avoid direct confrontation, escalation of conflict, and the kind of win-lose dynamics that create lasting resentment, revenge cycles, and unstable resolutions that often prove worse than the original problems they were intended to solve. Instead of meeting force with greater force, which typically escalates conflict and often destroys what we're trying to protect or improve, soft power finds creative ways around obstacles, transforms apparent enemies into natural allies, and addresses root causes rather than just treating surface symptoms that will inevitably reappear if underlying patterns remain unchanged. The practice begins with profound understanding that most opposition, resistance, and conflict comes from misunderstanding, unmet legitimate needs, past hurt that hasn't been acknowledged or healed, or genuine fear about consequences rather than inherent malice, evil intentions, or irreconcilable differences in fundamental values and interests. When we take time to understand these underlying causes and address them skillfully rather than just responding to their surface expressions through punishment, pressure, or counterattack, we often discover that apparent enemies share many of our basic concerns and can become valuable partners in creating solutions that serve everyone's authentic interests. This doesn't mean avoiding all confrontation, being passive in the face of genuine injustice, or accepting harmful behavior without appropriate boundaries and consequences. Sometimes clear, firm responses are absolutely necessary to protect vulnerable people, maintain essential standards, or prevent serious damage to individuals and communities. But soft power approaches choose the minimum force actually required to address problems effectively, prefer prevention to punishment, emphasize healing and learning rather than retribution, and consistently look for solutions that preserve dignity and enable positive future relationships, even when dealing with difficult people and challenging circumstances. Lao-Tzu emphasizes repeatedly that soft power emerges from genuine inner strength rather than external weakness, superficial niceness, or conflict avoidance based on fear of confrontation. The person who can remain calm under intense pressure, maintain compassion toward difficult people, respond thoughtfully rather than reactively to criticism or attack, and find creative solutions to complex problems possesses a kind of power that others cannot shake, diminish, or destroy through external pressure. This inner stability and emotional resilience creates natural influence that others immediately recognize and respect. People are naturally drawn to individuals who embody this kind of centered strength because they feel safer, more creative, and more capable of expressing their own best qualities in the presence of such grounded, peaceful energy. The principle appears clearly in Lao Tzu's approach to conflict resolution and problem solving. Instead of trying to prove who's right and who's wrong, assign blame for past mistakes, or force submission from opponents, soft power seeks solutions that genuinely serve everyone's legitimate interests while addressing the real issues that created conflict in the first place. Instead of demanding public admission of guilt or humiliating surrender from those who have created problems, soft power looks for ways that people can maintain basic dignity while changing direction, learning from experience, and contributing to better outcomes in the future. Instead of focusing primarily on punishment for past harm, it emphasizes prevention of future problems and the creation of conditions where people naturally choose more constructive approaches to meeting their needs and expressing their concerns. This approach often proves far more effective than traditional win-lose strategies because it removes the psychological and social pressures that typically cause people to defend their positions stubbornly, escalate conflicts rather than seeking resolution, and look for opportunities to retaliate when they feel they've been defeated or humiliated rather than heard and respected. Soft power also operates through what Lao Tzu calls leading by following, understanding what people genuinely need and want, then creating opportunities for them to achieve these goals in ways that also serve broader community interests and long-term well-being. This requires genuine empathy, careful listening, and the wisdom to distinguish between authentic needs and superficial wants, between constructive desires and destructive impulses. When people feel truly understood and supported in achieving their legitimate goals, they naturally become allies rather than opponents. When they feel manipulated, dismissed, or forced to choose between their own well-being and compliance with external demands, they naturally resist, rebel, or find indirect ways to pursue their objectives that often create new problems for everyone involved. Part 7. Returning to the source. Rediscovering our essential nature. What does it mean to live in authentic harmony with our deepest nature? How do we maintain genuine connection to our essential self while navigating the complex pressures, expectations, and demands of contemporary social life? How do we distinguish between what's truly ours and what we've unconsciously adopted from external influences? Lao Tzu's teaching about returning to the source offers profound guidance for staying grounded in original wisdom, while skillfully engaging with the practical requirements of modern existence. Return to the root, and you will find peace, Lao Tzu counsels, pointing directly toward our original nature as it exists before becoming covered and obscured by layers of social conditioning, artificial desires, learned fears, competitive programming, and the countless ways we learn to adapt ourselves to external expectations rather than living from authentic inner guidance. This fundamental root, or source, isn't something we need to create, achieve, or develop through special techniques or extensive spiritual practice, but rather something we need to uncover, remember, and return to through the gentle process of removing what doesn't genuinely belong to our essential nature, like a magnificent sculpture that already exists within a block of marble, requiring only the careful removal of excess stone to reveal its natural beauty. Our authentic self already possesses everything necessary for genuine fulfillment and effective living. This return to source doesn't require abandoning civilization, rejecting all education and cultural development, or attempting to live like primitive people without the benefits of accumulated human knowledge, technological tools, and social institutions that genuinely serve human flourishing. Rather, it means developing the wisdom to maintain clear awareness of what's authentically ours versus what we've unconsciously absorbed from family patterns, cultural programming, media influences, peer pressure, and the countless subtle ways that social environments shape our desires, beliefs, values, and behavioral patterns. The process begins with what Lao-Tzu calls careful observation of oneself, developing the capacity for honest, patient, non-judgmental awareness of our inner landscape of thoughts, emotions, motivations, reactions, and the often unconscious patterns that drive our choices and shape our experience. Most people live so focused on external circumstances, other people's behavior, and the constantly changing flow of events around them that they rarely develop intimate familiarity with their own mental and emotional processes. Returning to the source requires cultivating the ability to observe our own consciousness with the same careful attention we might give to studying a fascinating book, watching a beautiful sunset, or listening to inspiring music. This means noticing what kinds of thoughts arise spontaneously versus what we deliberately choose to think about, recognizing which emotions emerge naturally from circumstances versus which ones we generate through mental commentary and interpretation, and distinguishing between motivations that spring from authentic care and interest versus those driven by social pressure, unconscious competition, or learned patterns of seeking approval and avoiding disapproval. This self-observation gradually reveals how much of our mental activity consists of worry about future possibilities that may never occur, regret about past events that cannot be changed, fantasy about alternative scenarios that distract us from present reality, and internal commentary that separates us from direct experience of what's actually happening right now. The source is always completely available in the present moment, but we miss it consistently when our attention gets scattered across time, lost in mental stories about ourselves and others, or absorbed in the endless stream of desires, fears, plans, and reactions that constitute most people's ordinary state of consciousness. The practice involves gently returning awareness to immediate reality whenever we notice that attention has wandered into these habitual mental patterns. This isn't forced concentration or rigid meditation technique, but rather the simple, natural process of becoming interested in what's actually here rather than what we're thinking about what's here, what we wish were here, or what we're afraid might be here. Lao Tzu describes the source as the mother of all things, suggesting both the fundamental creative principle from which everything emerges and the nurturing, sustaining wisdom that supports all healthy growth and development. By returning to this source through present moment awareness, we naturally tap into reservoirs of creativity, intelligence, compassion, and inner strength that don't depend on external circumstances, personal achievements, or other people's recognition and approval. This connection naturally produces what Lao Tzu calls constant virtue. Not moral rules imposed from outside through social pressure or religious commandments, but ethical behavior that flows spontaneously from clear understanding of our fundamental interconnection with all life. When we recognize experientially, rather than just intellectually, that harming others ultimately harms ourselves, and that supporting others' genuine well-being naturally enhances our own, ethical behavior becomes as natural and effortless as breathing. The return to source also involves what Lao Tzu describes as embracing the One, directly experiencing the underlying unity that connects all apparent diversity and multiplicity. This isn't intellectual understanding or philosophical belief, but immediate recognition of our essential interconnection with the entire web of existence that includes other people, the natural world, and the mysterious source from which all manifestation continuously emerges. From this perspective of experiential unity, caring for others becomes as spontaneous and natural as caring for ourselves, because the artificial boundaries that create the illusion of separation become transparent. We begin to understand that individual well-being and collective well-being are not competing concerns, but complementary aspects of a larger wholeness that includes and transcends both personal and social dimensions of existence. This recognition naturally dissolves many of the internal conflicts, anxieties, and competitive pressures that create suffering when we believe we're separate, isolated individuals who must constantly struggle against a hostile or indifferent environment to meet our needs and achieve our goals. Instead, we begin to experience ourselves as expressions of the same intelligent, creative force that manifests as everything around us, supported by the same natural wisdom that guides the growth of plants, the movement of seasons, and all the countless processes that maintain the dynamic balance of healthy ecosystems. Part 8. The Paradox of Weakness and Strength. Understanding True Power. How can weakness become strength? How can yielding lead to victory? How can embracing vulnerability create unshakable confidence? How can admitting ignorance generate wisdom? These profound paradoxes lie at the very heart of Lao Tzu's revolutionary understanding of power, effectiveness, and success, challenging virtually every assumption of competitive culture while revealing practical wisdom for achieving lasting results with minimal effort and maximum sustainability. The weak overcome the strong, the soft overcome the hard, Lao Tzu observes with characteristic simplicity, pointing toward fundamental principles that operate consistently throughout the natural world and human experience, though they often remain invisible to minds trained in conventional thinking about power, competition, and achievement. A tiny seed possesses the power to split solid concrete through patient, persistent growth that works with natural forces rather than opposing them. Gentle spring rain penetrates hard earth that heavy hammers cannot break, bringing life to dormant plants and replenishing underground water sources. A mother's soft voice calms an agitated child more effectively than loud commands or threats could accomplish. Quiet confidence influences others more powerfully than aggressive assertion or manipulative persuasion. These aren't isolated exceptions or random anomalies, but clear expressions of fundamental principles about how genuine transformation actually occurs. Direct force creates equal and opposite resistance according to basic physical laws. And this same principle operates in psychological and social dynamics. Aggressive approaches often generate defensiveness, rebellion, or passive resistance that undermines the very results they're intended to achieve. Gentle, patient approaches naturally disarm opposition, create space for organic change, and enable natural responses that prove far more stable and lasting than changes imposed through external pressure, manipulation, or force. Hard, rigid approaches break under stress, that flexible approaches absorb and integrate without losing their essential integrity or effectiveness. The key lies in understanding that what appears weak from one limited perspective often reveals profound strength when viewed from broader understanding of how change, growth, and influence actually work. The willow tree survives fierce storms that break mighty oaks because it bends gracefully with powerful winds rather than rigidly resisting forces it cannot control. This flexibility isn't weakness, but intelligence, the wisdom to work harmoniously with natural forces rather than exhausting itself through futile opposition. Lao-Tzu applies this principle directly to human relationships, social change, and personal development. The person who can remain calm and centered under intense pressure, respond thoughtfully to harsh criticism without becoming defensive or reactive, maintain genuine compassion toward difficult people who are causing problems, and find creative solutions to complex challenges possesses a kind of power that others cannot diminish, shake, or destroy through external pressure, manipulation, or attack. This inner strength naturally influences others more effectively than external force. Dramatic displays of competence or aggressive assertion of personal will. People are naturally drawn to individuals who embody this kind of centered, peaceful strength because they feel safer, more creative, and more capable of expressing their own best qualities in the presence of such grounded, non-reactive energy. The paradox appears clearly in various styles of leadership and influence. The leader who readily admits mistakes and limitations naturally gains credibility and trust from those they serve. The teacher who acknowledges their own ongoing learning naturally inspires students to embrace their own curiosity and growth process. The parent who shows appropriate vulnerability naturally builds deeper connection and communication with their children. The counselor who doesn't pretend to have all the answers naturally creates space for clients to discover their own wisdom and solutions. These apparent weaknesses, admitting ignorance, showing vulnerability, acknowledging limitations, become sources of authentic strength because they demonstrate honesty, humility, and the kind of humanity that others immediately recognize and respect. Similarly, the willingness to occupy lower positions, serve others without demanding recognition, and support others' success without competing for credit often leads to greater influence and more lasting impact than aggressive pursuit of status, power, and visible achievement. The person who genuinely serves others' needs becomes indispensable in ways that cannot be replaced by more dramatic or impressive competitors. The individual who listens carefully gains wisdom and understanding that enables more effective action than those who are constantly talking, asserting, and trying to impress others with their knowledge or capabilities. The person who willingly learns from others, including those who might appear less educated or sophisticated, often discovers insights and solutions that more prideful people miss entirely because they're too busy protecting their image or defending their existing beliefs to remain open to new information and alternative perspectives. By avoiding competition for status, recognition, and external validation, the sage often achieves more meaningful and sustainable results than those who exhaust themselves fighting for prominence, temporary advantages, or social approval that proves ultimately hollow and unsatisfying. This approach extends to how we understand and work with our own personal limitations, weaknesses, and areas where we lack knowledge, skill, or experience. Instead of trying to hide these limitations or pretending to be more capable than we actually are, soft power involves honest acknowledgement of what we don't know, coupled with genuine openness to learning, appropriate requests for help when needed, and collaboration with others whose strengths complement our own areas of challenge. This honest approach to personal limitations eliminates the exhausting effort required to maintain false images, prevents the kinds of mistakes that come from pretending to understand things we don't actually comprehend, and creates opportunities for authentic connection and mutual support that becomes impossible when people are constantly trying to appear more knowledgeable, competent, or confident than they genuinely feel. The wisdom of embracing weakness also applies to how we handle failure, disappointment, and setbacks in our personal and professional lives. Instead of viewing these experiences as evidence of personal inadequacy or reasons for discouragement, soft power recognizes them as valuable sources of information, opportunities for learning and growth, and natural aspects of any meaningful creative process. When we can acknowledge failures honestly, without excessive self-criticism or defensive blame of external circumstances, we naturally extract valuable lessons that prevent similar problems in the future. When we can remain open and curious in the face of disappointment rather than becoming bitter or cynical, we often discover unexpected opportunities and alternative approaches that prove better than our original plans. This doesn't mean seeking failure or being careless about important responsibilities, but rather maintaining the kind of flexible, learning-oriented attitude that enables us to respond skillfully to whatever actually happens, rather than wasting energy on regret, resentment, or futile attempts to control outcomes that are beyond our direct influence. Part 9. The Art of Perfect Timing. Living in harmony with natural rhythms. When is the right moment to act decisively? When should we wait patiently for circumstances to develop more favorably? How do we recognize the natural rhythms and cycles that govern effective action in human affairs, just as they govern the growth of plants, the movement of seasons, and all the organic processes that maintain healthy balance in natural ecosystems? Lao-Tzu's profound understanding of timing reveals one of the most practical and immediately applicable aspects of Taoist wisdom: the art of moving in perfect harmony with natural cycles rather than forcing premature action or missing optimal opportunities through inattention or excessive caution. There is a time for being ahead, a time for being behind, a time for being in motion, a time for being at rest, a time for vigorous effort, a time for gentle patience, a time for gathering energy, a time for expressing it fully, Lao Tzu observes, pointing toward the natural rhythms that govern all healthy development and sustainable achievement. Experienced farmers understand these principles intuitively through direct observation of agricultural cycles. They know that seeds planted too early in spring will be killed by late frost, while seeds planted too late will not have sufficient growing time to mature before autumn temperatures end the growing season. They understand that soil needs time to rest between crops, that some plants flourish in full sunlight while others require shade, that forcing growth through excessive fertilization often produces weak plants that cannot survive natural stresses. This agricultural wisdom applies directly to human creative projects, relationship development, career advancement, learning processes, and virtually every aspect of meaningful endeavor. Most failures, disappointments, and inefficient struggles result not from lack of effort, inadequate resources, or insufficient knowledge, but from poor timing. Trying to force results before natural conditions support success, or missing opportunities because we're not paying attention to changing circumstances that create favorable moments for action. The sage develops increasingly refined sensitivity to these natural cycles through careful observation, patient attention to changing circumstances, and cultivation of the inner stillness that enables clear perception of subtle indicators that reveal optimal timing for various types of action. Instead of rushing toward goals, regardless of external conditions, they learn to recognize when circumstances naturally support advancement and when they support waiting, preparation, rest, or consolidation of previous gains. Instead of forcing premature action that wastes energy and often creates unnecessary complications, they develop the wisdom to know when to advance decisively and when to retreat strategically, when to speak clearly and when to remain silent and listen, when to take initiative and when to allow others to lead. This sensitivity to natural timing emerges from what Lao-Tzu calls returning to stillness, the cultivation of inner quietude that enables accurate perception of both internal readiness and external opportunity. When our minds are agitated by anxiety about future outcomes, excitement about potential possibilities, pressure to achieve immediate results, or fear of missing opportunities, we often miss the subtle indicators that reveal whether circumstances actually support the actions we're considering. The practice involves developing what contemporary psychology might call meta-awareness, the ability to observe our own mental and emotional states clearly enough to recognize how they affect our perception of situations and the quality of our decision-making. When we're feeling anxious, everything seems urgent and potentially threatening. When we're overly excited, everything seems immediately possible and free of significant challenges. When we're discouraged or depressed, everything seems hopeless or too difficult to attempt. The sage learns to account for these subjective factors while assessing objective circumstances, neither allowing emotional states to completely distort their perception, nor ignoring the important information that emotions provide about readiness, energy levels, and authentic motivation for particular courses of action. Natural timing also involves understanding what Lao-Tzu calls the rhythm of the Tao, the organic cycles of expansion and contraction, activity and rest, growth and consolidation, external engagement, and internal reflection that characterize all healthy development in individuals, relationships, organizations, and communities. By aligning personal and professional activities with these natural rhythms, rather than trying to maintain constant, high-intensity effort or forcing continuous growth without periods of integration and renewal, we can accomplish significantly more while experiencing less stress, maintaining better overall health, and creating results that prove more sustainable over time. This means recognizing that creativity naturally flows in cycles, with periods of inspiration and productivity alternating with times that call for rest, reflection, and allowing ideas to develop organically below the level of conscious effort. It means understanding that relationships require rhythms of closeness and space, intense interaction and quiet independence, focused attention and relaxed companionship. It means knowing that learning happens through cycles of taking in new information and integrating it with previous understanding, periods of focused study, and times of letting knowledge settle naturally into practical wisdom through experience and reflection. The art of timing also extends to understanding seasonal and cyclical patterns in larger social, economic, and cultural systems. Just as individual projects and relationships have natural rhythms, entire societies go through predictable cycles of growth and consolidation, innovation and tradition, expansion and reflection that create different opportunities and challenges during different historical periods. The wise person learns to recognize these larger patterns and align their personal goals and professional activities with social and economic currents that support their objectives rather than working against dominant trends that make success unnecessarily difficult, regardless of individual effort and capability. This doesn't mean passively accepting whatever happens or abandoning personal initiative in favor of fatalistic resignation, but rather developing the wisdom to distinguish between circumstances we can influence effectively and those we need to work around skillfully, between goals that are achievable with appropriate effort and timing and those that require waiting for more favorable conditions. Sometimes the most effective action is decisive advancement when opportunities are optimal. Sometimes it's strategic retreat when conditions are unfavorable. Sometimes it's patient preparation during quiet periods that enables us to respond quickly when favorable circumstances arise. Sometimes it's simply maintaining steady, consistent effort through changing conditions while remaining alert for moments when increased effort or different approaches become appropriate. Part 10: Death, Transformation, and the Eternal Tao. What happens when physical life ends? Is there existence beyond bodily death? How do we live meaningfully and peacefully in the face of mortality, our own and that of everyone we love? How do we understand loss, change, and the apparent ending of everything we hold dear? Lao-Tzu's approach to these ultimate questions reveals a perspective that transcends both materialistic denial of spiritual dimensions and religious dogma about afterlife rewards and punishments, offering instead a vision of existence that recognizes death as natural transformation within the eternal flow of the Tao. For Lao-Tzu, death and birth are complementary aspects of the continuous transformation that characterizes all existence rather than absolute beginning and ending points that create or destroy essential reality. All things under heaven are born from being. Being is born from non-being, he observes, pointing toward the mysterious source from which all manifestation continuously emerges and to which it eventually returns in the endless cycle of cosmic creativity. This non-being isn't nihilistic emptiness, absolute nothingness, or the kind of extinction that materialistic philosophies sometimes propose as the ultimate fate of consciousness. Rather, it represents the formless, unlimited potential from which all specific forms arise and which continues to exist as the source and sustaining ground of everything that appears within the manifest world. Like water that evaporates from the ocean only to return as rain, snow, streams, and rivers that eventually flow back to their source. Individual existence represents a temporary expression of the eternal Tao that continues beyond any particular manifestation while remaining essentially connected to the infinite creative source from which it emerged. The sage who understands this principle doesn't fear death as ultimate extinction or cling desperately to physical life as the only form of meaningful existence, but recognizes mortality as natural return to the source from which new life continuously emerges. This understanding transforms our relationship with loss, change, and the inevitable ending of all temporal forms without denying the genuine grief and sadness that naturally accompany the death of loved ones or the conclusion of meaningful chapters in our own lives. Instead of denying death or being paralyzed by its inevitability, we can embrace the precious quality that comes from recognizing the temporary nature of all specific forms, while maintaining conscious connection to what's eternal and indestructible within existence itself. This perspective enables us to love fully and engage completely with life's opportunities while holding lightly to outcomes and remaining open to the constant changes that characterize all manifestation. Lao-Tzu describes a kind of practical immortality available to those who align so completely with the Tao that their individual identity becomes transparent to eternal principles and natural patterns that transcend personal existence. This isn't survival of the ego personality in some heavenly realm or reincarnation of individual consciousness in future lifetimes, but rather the dissolution of the artificial boundaries that create the illusion of separation between individual and universal, personal and cosmic, temporary and eternal. The sage achieves this functional immortality not by clinging desperately to personal life or accumulating spiritual merit through religious practices, but by letting go so completely of narrow self-interest and fixed identity that they become clear vehicles for the Tao's natural expression in whatever circumstances arise. The sage does not attempt anything very big, and thus achieves greatness. Lao-Tzu observes, pointing toward the paradox that surrendering personal ambition and individual agenda enables participation in something infinitely larger and more enduring than any individual accomplishment. By dissolving the illusion of separate selfhood through complete alignment with natural wisdom and cosmic harmony, the sage participates consciously in the eternal creativity that manifests as the universe itself. Their individual personality may dissolve at physical death, just like everyone else's, but their essential contribution to the ongoing flow of wisdom, compassion, and natural order continues through the countless ways their influence has shaped other people, cultural patterns, and the subtle field of consciousness that connects all beings. This perspective offers profound comfort and practical guidance for facing loss and change while maintaining realistic acceptance of physical limitations and the genuine pain that accompanies major transitions. We can grieve authentically when loved ones die while recognizing that what we truly loved in them, their essential kindness, wisdom, humor, creativity, and capacity for care, continues in forms that transcend physical existence. The qualities that made someone precious to us don't disappear when their body ceases to function, but continue to influence the world through all the ways their presence shaped other people's lives, through the love and wisdom they shared, through the contributions they made to human understanding and cultural development, and through the subtle but real energetic patterns that connect all consciousness across apparent boundaries of space, time, and individual identity. Part 11. The Mysterious Power of Emptiness. What is the value of what isn't there? How can absence become presence? Why does Lao-Tzu repeatedly point toward emptiness, silence, and space as sources of utility and power? His insights about the creative potential of emptiness revolutionize our understanding of productivity, creativity, and effectiveness, while challenging the assumption that more is always better than less, that fullness is superior to emptiness, that constant activity produces better results than periods of rest and reflection. We join spokes together in a wheel, but it is the center hole that makes the wagon move. Lao Tzu observes, pointing toward one of his most practical and immediately applicable insights. We shape clay into a pot, but it is the emptiness inside that holds whatever we want. We hammer wood for a house, but it is the inner space that makes it livable. We work with being, but non-being is what we use. These aren't abstract philosophical statements, but direct observations about how usefulness and functionality actually work in every aspect of practical life. The empty space inside a cup makes it capable of holding water. The silence between musical notes makes melody and rhythm possible. The pauses between words make meaningful communication possible. The rest between activities allows for integration, renewal, and preparation for future action. Modern culture systematically undervalues and often completely ignores the importance of emptiness, silence, rest, and non-doing in favor of constant activity, information consumption, entertainment, and the kind of busyness that often prevents the very results it's intended to achieve. We fill every moment with stimulation, every space with objects, every silence with noise, every pause with additional activity, and then wonder why we feel overwhelmed, scattered, and unable to access our natural creativity and intuitive wisdom. Lao Tzu suggests that our most important work often happens in the spaces between obvious actions, during periods when we're not actively pursuing goals, in the quiet moments when we're simply present to what's already here rather than constantly reaching for something else. This isn't laziness or wasted time, but recognition that consciousness itself requires space to operate clearly, that creativity emerges from emptiness rather than fullness, that wisdom arises naturally when we stop filling our minds with constant mental activity. The practice of cultivating emptiness begins with creating literal spaces in our daily schedules, periods of time when we're not trying to accomplish anything specific, solve any problems, or improve any aspect of our lives or circumstances. This might mean sitting quietly for a few minutes each morning before beginning daily activities, taking short walks without listening to podcasts or music, or simply spending time in natural settings without agenda or purpose beyond being present to whatever appears. Initially, most people find this kind of purposeless time uncomfortable because we've been conditioned to believe that we must constantly manage, control, and direct our experience in order to feel productive and worthwhile. The mind typically fills empty space with worry about the future, analysis of past events, planning for upcoming activities, or various forms of mental entertainment that prevent direct contact with present moment reality. But as we develop comfort with emptiness and begin to trust natural processes, organic timing, and the kind of intelligence that operates beyond our conscious planning and analytical understanding, we often discover that our most creative insights, effective solutions, and satisfying experiences emerge from these apparently unproductive periods rather than from forced effort and deliberate striving. This principle applies directly to creative work, problem solving, and any activity that requires innovation, intuition, or fresh perspective. Artists, writers, musicians, and inventors have long recognized that their best ideas often come during walks, showers, quiet reflection, or other activities that engage the body while allowing the mind to rest from focused concentration and analytical thinking. Scientists and researchers frequently report that breakthrough insights arrive not during intense study or laboratory work, but during relaxed moments when they're not actively working on particular problems. The conscious mind gathers information and defines challenges, but solutions often emerge from the unconscious, non-rational intelligence that operates most freely when we're not trying to control or direct its activity. The cultivation of emptiness also transforms our approach to relationships and communication. Instead of constantly talking, explaining, persuading, or entertaining others, we learn the value of spacious listening that creates room for people to express themselves fully, discover their own insights, and feel genuinely heard and understood. Most people rarely experience being listened to without interruption, judgment, or immediate advice. Giving from others, who are usually more interested in expressing their own opinions than in understanding what's actually being communicated. When we can offer the gift of empty, receptive attention, we often enable others to access their own wisdom and solutions while building deeper connection and trust than any amount of clever conversation or helpful suggestions could achieve. Emptiness in relationships also means not filling every interaction with constant activity, entertainment, or problem solving, but allowing space for simple presence, comfortable silence, and the kind of relaxed companionship that doesn't require constant stimulation or mutual performance. Many relationships suffer from excessive fullness, too much talking, too many activities, too many demands for attention and engagement, rather than insufficient connection or shared experience. In organizational and leadership contexts, the power of emptiness appears as the wisdom of not micromanaging every detail, not having opinions about every decision, not filling every meeting with dense agenda items that leave no space for organic discussion, creative input, or the emergence of solutions that no one initially planned or anticipated. The leader who can remain empty and receptive often enables groups to access collective wisdom and collaborative creativity that becomes impossible when someone is constantly directing, controlling, or filling space with their own ideas and preferences. This doesn't mean abdication of leadership responsibility, but rather the sophisticated understanding that some of the most important leadership work involves creating and maintaining space for others to contribute their best thinking and most creative responses. Part 12. The Great Way of Natural Harmony. How do we live in authentic harmony with the natural world and the deeper patterns that govern healthy existence? How do we distinguish between artificial cultural demands and genuine requirements for human flourishing? How do we create sustainable ways of life that serve both individual well-being and the health of the larger ecological and social systems we're part of? Lao-Tzu's vision of the Great Way offers guidance for aligning human activities with the same principles of balance, sustainability, and mutual support that maintain healthy ecosystems throughout the natural world. The Great Way isn't a specific path, methodology, or set of rules to follow, but rather the natural harmony that emerges when human consciousness and activity align with the deeper patterns that govern all healthy development and sustainable existence. This alignment produces what Lao Tzu calls effortless order, social, economic, and cultural systems that support human flourishing without requiring constant management, enforcement, or correction, because they work with human nature rather than against it. When people follow the Great Way, horses and oxen graze freely in the fields, Lao Tzu observes, describing a condition of such natural harmony that even domestic animals don't need to be controlled or confined because there's no conflict between their natural behavior and human needs. This isn't naive romanticism about some golden age of perfect peace, but recognition that many problems we consider inevitable actually result from systems and approaches that ignore or oppose natural patterns rather than working skillfully with them. Contemporary examples of this principle include permaculture, approaches to agriculture that work with natural ecosystems rather than fighting against them through chemical inputs and mechanical manipulation. Organizational structures that support people's natural capacity for creativity and collaboration, rather than controlling them through rigid hierarchies and competitive pressure. Economic systems that operate through sustainable cycles, rather than requiring constant growth and resource extraction. And educational approaches that support organic learning processes rather than forcing information into minds through standardized curricula that ignore individual differences and natural developmental rhythms. The Great Way emerges naturally when societies prioritize long-term sustainability over short-term profit, when institutions serve genuine human needs rather than perpetuating themselves through artificial complexity, when leaders focus on creating conditions for others to flourish rather than accumulating personal power and recognition, and when individuals align their daily activities with values and goals that enhance rather than diminish their essential nature and authentic capabilities. This alignment requires what Lao-Tzu calls knowing what is enough, the wisdom to distinguish between genuine needs and artificial wants, between natural desires and culturally programmed cravings, between activities that truly nourish and those that provide only temporary stimulation or distraction. Most contemporary problems, both individual and social, stem from losing touch with natural limits and pursuing endless growth, accumulation, and stimulation that eventually becomes destructive rather than beneficial. The Great Way naturally operates through cycles rather than linear progression, through sustainable rhythms rather than constant acceleration, through quality rather than quantity, through depth rather than surface complexity. Human beings who align with these natural patterns find that their lives become simultaneously simpler and richer, more effortless and more effective, more peaceful and more creative. Instead of constantly struggling against circumstances, fighting for resources, and competing with others for limited opportunities, they discover abundance that emerges from understanding and working with natural patterns of abundance that already exist throughout the cosmos. Instead of forcing artificial goals and pursuing socially approved definitions of success, they find satisfaction in activities that genuinely express their nature and contribute meaningfully to the larger whole they're part of. This doesn't mean rejecting all technology, abandoning useful cultural achievements, or attempting to live like prehistoric people without the benefits of accumulated human knowledge and social cooperation. Rather, it means developing the wisdom to distinguish between technologies and cultural practices that enhance our natural capabilities and those that diminish them, between social institutions that serve genuine human flourishing and those that exist primarily to perpetuate themselves or serve narrow special interests. The Great Way includes embracing appropriate technology that supports human creativity, connection, and healthy development, while avoiding technologies that create dependency, isolation, or disconnection from natural rhythms and genuine human needs. It includes participating in social institutions that enhance individual and collective well-being, while refusing to support systems that operate through exploitation, manipulation, or the artificial creation of scarcity and conflict. Conclusion: living the Tao in contemporary times As we reach the end of our extended journey through Lao Tzu's profound wisdom, we find ourselves not with a complete philosophical system that answers every question, but with a living approach to existence that remains as relevant and transformative today as it was 2,500 years ago. In our hyper-connected, rapidly changing, achievement-oriented world, the ancient sages' teachings offer something increasingly rare and precious, a way of being that emphasizes natural harmony over forced control, organic simplicity over artificial complexity, and authentic wisdom over mere information accumulation. What emerges from our comprehensive exploration is a revolutionary thinker whose insights transcend all cultural boundaries and historical limitations. Lao Tzu addressed the universal human challenges that every thoughtful person encounters, regardless of their background, circumstances, or particular life situation. How do we find genuine peace amidst constant chaos and change? How do we act effectively without exhausting ourselves through excessive struggle? How do we lead others without corrupting ourselves through the pursuit of power? How do we face uncertainty, loss, and mortality with grace, wisdom, and inner strength? His profound answers, while emerging from ancient Chinese culture and expressed through classical Eastern imagery and concepts, speak directly to contemporary concerns with startling relevance and practical applicability. In our current age of environmental crisis and ecological destruction, Lao Tzu's emphasis on living in harmony with natural patterns offers crucial guidance for developing sustainable practices that serve both human needs and the health of the larger planetary systems we depend upon. In our time of intense political polarization and social division, his understanding of soft power and inclusive leadership provides viable alternatives to zero-sum thinking that creates winners and losers rather than solutions that serve everyone's genuine interests. In our era of information, overwhelm, and technological complexity, his teaching about the uncarved block and return to essential simplicity suggests practical ways to maintain clarity, authenticity, and effective response to changing circumstances. Perhaps most importantly for contemporary life, Lao Tzu offers a vision of human potential that neither demands impossible perfection nor accepts mediocre resignation to limitation and suffering. The sage is not a superhuman figure with extraordinary powers, but rather an ordinary person who has learned to align with natural wisdom that's constantly available to everyone willing to observe carefully, listen deeply, and respond authentically to what life presents. This democratization of wisdom suggests that the deepest spiritual insights and most effective practical approaches aren't reserved for special individuals with unique gifts or extensive training, but represent the natural flowering of human consciousness when it's freed from artificial complications, cultural conditioning, and the pursuit of goals that have little connection to genuine fulfillment or authentic service. The practice of Wu Wei, effortless action, speaks directly to contemporary concerns about burnout, chronic stress, and unsustainable approaches to work and achievement that exhaust people without producing correspondingly satisfying results. Instead of the relentless striving that characterizes much of modern life, Lao Tzu demonstrates how remarkable effectiveness can emerge from understanding and cooperating with natural patterns rather than fighting against them through force, manipulation, or excessive effort. His teaching about the valley spirit and the power of receptivity offers profound wisdom for addressing the gender imbalance and overemphasis on aggressive, competitive approaches that characterize many contemporary institutions and cultural patterns. By recognizing and cultivating the essential power of patience, listening, nurturing, and supportive influence, Lao Tzu provides frameworks for integrating feminine wisdom into leadership, problem-solving, and personal development in ways that enhance rather than diminish masculine strengths and capabilities. The concept of Pu, the uncarved block, directly challenges contemporary assumptions about progress, self-improvement, and the constant pursuit of enhancement that often takes people further away from satisfaction and authentic effectiveness rather than closer to them. In a culture obsessed with optimization, performance improvement, and the accumulation of skills, knowledge, and experiences, Lao Tzu suggests that our original nature already contains everything necessary for genuine fulfillment and natural excellence. This doesn't mean rejecting all learning, growth, and development, but rather distinguishing between activities that enhance our natural capacities and those that obscure them through excessive complication, artificial goals, and the pursuit of socially approved achievements that may have little connection to our authentic interests and capabilities. Lao Tzu's profound understanding of paradox proves especially valuable for navigating the complexity and apparent contradictions that characterize contemporary existence. His insights about how weakness can become strength, how yielding can lead to victory, how emptiness enables fullness, and how not knowing can generate wisdom offer practical guidance for dealing with situations where conventional approaches prove inadequate or counterproductive. The sage's approach to leadership through service and moral example rather than control and manipulation provides crucial wisdom for anyone in positions of influence, whether in families, organizations, communities, or larger social and political contexts. Lao Tzu's principles demonstrate how authentic authority emerges naturally from wisdom, integrity, and genuine care for others' well-being, rather than from position, title, or the exercise of power over those we're meant to serve. Perhaps most remarkably, Lao Tzu's teachings remain astonishingly fresh, practical, and immediately applicable despite their ancient origins and the dramatic changes in human civilization since they were first recorded. This suggests that the deepest truths about human nature, effective living, and sustainable social organization transcend historical periods and cultural differences because they're based on careful observation of patterns that remain constant regardless of changing external circumstances. What the sage discovered about the Tao, about natural harmony, about authentic power, and about the art of effortless action applies as directly to contemporary challenges as it did to the political chaos and social upheaval of ancient China. The fundamental dynamics of human consciousness, the basic requirements for individual and collective flourishing, and the essential principles that govern effective action remain remarkably consistent across vastly different historical contexts. The mystery that surrounds Lao Tzu's historical existence, whether he was a single individual or a composite figure representing accumulated wisdom from multiple sources, ultimately matters far less than the profound practical value of the insights attributed to him. The Tao Te Ching continues to guide and inspire people across all cultural boundaries because it addresses perennial human concerns that remain constant despite changing external circumstances and technological developments. In our exploration, we've seen how Lao Tzu's wisdom applies directly to personal development, relationship dynamics, organizational leadership, creative expression, conflict resolution, and spiritual growth. His teachings offer both immediately practical techniques for daily life and profound philosophical insights into the nature of existence, consciousness, and our place within the larger cosmos. This integration of practical wisdom and deep understanding makes Taoism particularly valuable for contemporary seekers who want spirituality that enhances rather than escapes from ordinary life, who need guidance that addresses real-world challenges rather than abstract theoretical concerns, and who seek approaches that work with human nature rather than demanding impossible perfection or the suppression of normal human needs and desires. The sage's emphasis on natural timing and organic development provides essential guidance for anyone feeling pressured by artificial deadlines, unrealistic expectations, or the kind of forced productivity that often prevents the very results it's intended to achieve. By learning to recognize and work with natural rhythms rather than fighting against them, we can accomplish significantly more while experiencing much less stress and maintaining better overall health and sustainability. Lao-Tzu's approach to conflict resolution and social change through understanding root causes rather than just treating surface symptoms offers valuable frameworks for addressing personal, interpersonal, and broader social problems. His principle of finding common ground while respecting legitimate differences provides alternatives to the adversarial approaches that dominate much of contemporary discourse and often escalate problems rather than resolving them. The teaching about returning to the source speaks directly to contemporary concerns about authenticity, mental health, and maintaining genuine connection to our essential nature in a world that constantly pressures us to adopt artificial personas and pursue goals that have little connection to our authentic interests and values. His understanding of soft power and indirect influence proves especially relevant in our interconnected world, where traditional forms of authority are being questioned and new forms of leadership are emerging based on collaboration, service, and the ability to create conditions where others can discover and express their own capabilities and wisdom. The sage's perspective on mortality, change, and the eternal nature of the Tao provides profound comfort and practical guidance for dealing with loss, transition, and the uncertainty that characterizes human existence. His recognition that death and birth are complementary aspects of eternal transformation offers a middle way between materialistic denial of spiritual dimensions and dogmatic religious claims about afterlife survival that often create more anxiety than genuine comfort. What makes Lao-Tzu's wisdom particularly valuable for contemporary times is its emphasis on integration rather than division, synthesis rather than separation. Instead of rejecting material concerns in favor of spiritual pursuits or dismissing spiritual dimensions in favor of practical achievements, Taoism demonstrates how to honor both aspects of human experience within a unified approach to living that serves all dimensions of our nature. The ancient sage's fundamental confidence in the intelligibility and benevolence of the Tao provides hope and orientation in times of confusion, despair, and apparent meaninglessness. While not denying the reality of suffering, injustice, and genuine evil in the world, Lao-Tzu's perspective suggests that ultimate reality is characterized by creativity, harmony, and compassion that we can learn to recognize and participate in consciously. This doesn't mean accepting all circumstances passively or failing to work for positive change when action is needed, but rather maintaining trust in the deeper intelligence that guides natural processes and finding ways to align our efforts with patterns that support long-term healing, growth, and sustainable well-being for all beings. This perspective offers a mature spirituality that neither demands naive optimism nor succumbs to cynical despair, but maintains hope based on understanding rather than wishful thinking, and encourages appropriate action based on wisdom rather than reactive emotion or ideological commitment. The enduring relevance of Lao Tzu's teachings suggests that certain truths about existence, consciousness, and effective living transcend cultural boundaries and historical changes because they're based on careful observation of patterns that operate consistently throughout human experience. What the sage discovered about the nature of authentic power, the requirements for sustainable happiness, and the art of living in harmony with natural rhythms remains as valuable today as it was 2,500 years ago. In studying the ancient master, we encounter not just historical curiosity or abstract philosophy, but living wisdom that continues to offer practical guidance for contemporary challenges and timeless inspiration for the journey toward understanding, effectiveness, and genuine fulfillment that every human being undertakes, regardless of their particular circumstances or cultural background. Lao Tzu's example reminds us that the most profound insights often emerge from careful attention to ordinary experience rather than from complex theories or exotic practices, that the deepest wisdom involves learning to see clearly what's already present rather than acquiring something new or extraordinary, and that the art of living well consists primarily in aligning our activities with natural patterns that already exist throughout the universe. The old master, who walked westward on his water buffalo, carrying nothing but wisdom, has indeed left footprints that continue to guide anyone willing to undertake the journey toward simplicity, naturalness, and the profound peace that comes from living in harmony with the way that underlies all existence. His teachings remain as accessible today as they were in ancient China, offering timeless guidance for the eternal human quest to understand our place in the cosmos and discover how to live with wisdom, compassion, and authentic effectiveness in whatever circumstances we encounter. The sage's greatest gift may be demonstrating that extraordinary wisdom and lasting peace are available to ordinary people through ordinary attentiveness to the patterns that govern healthy existence. His legacy continues to remind us that the deepest truths are often surprisingly simple, that the most effective actions often appear effortless, and that the greatest power emerges from understanding and working with the natural harmony that already exists, rather than from forcing artificial solutions through excessive struggle and complicated manipulation. In a world that often seems chaotic and meaningless, Lao Tzu's wisdom offers hope that there is indeed a pattern that connects all things, a harmony that includes apparent opposites, and a source of renewal that never fails for those who learn to recognize and trust the Tao that cannot be named, yet reveals itself constantly to those who know how to look, with eyes unclouded by preconception and hearts open to the mysterious wisdom that flows through all existence.